I Flew with Captain Mac, a story from the collection entitled Rim by E.S. Wynne. Watch your six, everyone. Keep it tight. Grand flicked down her visor, gloved hand falling away to rest on the dual wing of her rig's throttle control. The Icarus conventional drives of her Sine Drive Alpha semi-atmospheric fighter waited at a patient and steady half-burn, ready to flare up to full and send her rig blasting into the green-tinged and cloudless sky of Alpha Centauri A's only inhabited planet at a moment's notice. Ptolemy was what the first settlers to land on this humid and swampy ball of jungle and rock had named it. And now it was a hotbed for renegade clone activity. That's why she was out here. That's why her entire squadron of 14 rigs was out here. Why Command had put them on patrol routes that took them over every bayou and slime-choked lake in the northern hemisphere, cruising at a crisp and level 800 kilometers per hour, their targeting scopes barely registering anything more than a lot of ambient static. Rich lips parted almost calmly beneath the form-fitting edges of her shaded visor as she clicked the mic again, voice filling the active channel with broken comm noise and an air of command that she knew perked every ear in range. Intel picked up a flight of Moes out here somewhere, she said quietly. Let's try to find them before they find us, yeah? According to Earth Standard Time, it was December 7th, 2245, and 4 months into the Galactic Naval Division's police action against the dissidents that had found their strongest hold in the Alpha Centauri system. Despite tensions rising dramatically between Vatgroans and the natural-born after laws came into effect that stripped away all the provisional rights of the genetically modified or engineered citizens of the Commonwealth's once overly lenient colonial initiative, the first riots against the new legislature had taken the decadent colonial embassies of Ptolemy completely by surprise. Within a few short days, pro-clone rights sentiment had caught and spread like wildfire, giving birth to a bloody movement of highly organized, highly efficient, vat-grown insurrectionists calling themselves the Centauri Syndicate. In less than a week, people who had once been slaves, sex toys, or the children of freed GMOs had banded together under the Syndicate's banner and taken control of every major military installation and government outpost from Alpha Centauri A to Proxima. Already close to 10% of the galactic media was siding with the Syndicate, supporting what they saw as the next big rebellion toward freedom, and the movement was threatening to spread further with a speed and ferocity that frightened the corporate fat cats back on Earth, especially when the reports of vat-grown clones and their other genetically modified cousins revolting and taking up arms against the state was coming in from as far away as the rural colonies out around Caus Borealis. Too many men of means had invested too heavily in the 23rd century's legalized equivalent of the slave trade, and talk of overturning the legislation that kept their pockets lined with ill-gotten blood money was as frightening to them as talk of stock market crashes or unavoidable bankruptcies. As such, the Terran Commonwealth's Galactic Naval Division had responded to the threat quickly. By the close of the second week, the TCG&D had 4 brand-new Jovian-class cruisers, staffed and shipped directly to the front lines, each vessel complete with a full complement of fighters, from Sine Drive's first run of semi-atmospherics to come out of the sparkling new corporate fleet yards deep in the Sirius system. Young lieutenant commanders, like Amal de Grand, men and women who had never tasted combat outside the simulator, had been put in charge of those wings and rigs, soon found themselves hurled into the thick of the fighting, coming up against desperate swarms of renegade GMOs using vicious hit-and-run guerrilla tactics to give their retrofitted crop dusters and antique fighters the edge they needed to take down the much more advanced rigs and better pilots the Navy was filling the skies with was rough, and the learning curve was as steep as any sheared-off incline. LC! Static lanced across the channel suddenly, crackling through the voice of someone young and eager, his tone full of anxious fight and fear. Grand set her jaw reflexively. She recognized the voice instantly. Her right rear wingman, Harrison. 10 o'clock high, he shouted. I can see them! They're coming right out of the sun! Grand craned her neck up, squinting into the brilliant light of Tolman's primary star, and caught sight of a flash of shifting silver, just in time for a cluster of heavily modified Syndicate aircraft to drop in a razor line from the glare of Alpha Centauri A like a pearl string of liquid fire. Salvaged rail lances and industrial-grade arc-wave lightning cannons flared in an instant, raining scorching death down onto the flight of sign drives, carving merciless lines through wings and shearing through plate with hot tenacity. Suddenly the comm was alive with screams, yells, conflicting orders. She shouted for quiet, but the call was lost in the noise, and in another instant the GMO pilots were among them, darting and rolling, arcing, rust and scrap metal plating flashing with a mosaic of salvaged colors in the harsh light as crude and unreliable weapons slashed burning swaths of fire and lightning through the sky, eating at her wingmen, her rigs, sending a handful to falling fiery deaths within seconds. Her fist closed across the dual wing of the throttle, pumped it, and the Icarus drives answered obediently in turn, hurling her forward and out of the swarm of fighters, her rig passing inches from the rust-mottled fuselage of a long, weather-beaten trainer that arced back into the fray behind her, underslung and mismatched rocket racks, flaring as payloads went darting off toward other desperate sign drives. In an instant, one of the GMOs was after her, a faceless clone in the long, swept-back cockpit of a B-series Landval, a fighter from the once prestigious Duke Industries lineup, as it had stood before the closure of their fleet yards and subsequent purchase by Sign Drive. The thing looked old, unstable, a rig that probably hadn't seen combat since the early 2100s, and spent the last century and a half collecting dust in somebody's barn. But the quartet of Agir plasma discharge carbines bolted across the sleek delta wing body of the thing spoke of modifications salvaged from top-of-the-line military hardware, stuff no older than a year, maybe two. Hot rounds flared past her, scorching hull as they burnt through the air on a near miss, and catapulted on into the sky ahead of her, trailing tracers of plasmatic steel. She gritted her teeth. Already she could tell the pilot was good. Too good. His tenacity and skill put him too close to her, too nimble to shake, too fast to escape from and lose in the atmosphere. The Landval had been designed for speed, and it kept up with her Sign Drive Alpha despite the fact that it wasn't running anything more advanced than a heavily modified form of archaic afterburning turbofan powered by a supply of equally archaic synth petrochem fuel. The only clear advantage she had over him now was her training, and with the GMO firmly on her tail and her wingmen dwindling into the distance, their screams echoing across the comm as they fell one by one to the Syndicate forces, she was starting to wonder how much of an advantage that really was. She had no support out here. It would only be a matter of moments before the Landval's rounds found their mark, before that quartet of carbines lit up with another volley of plasmatic rounds and shredded her Sign Drive into a wad of burning foil. But she still had one option left, one trump card, one way to play the aging Landval's weaknesses against it and turn the dogfight in her favor once again. The edge of a nervous grin shot across her face, fell away almost as quickly. They hadn't nicknamed her Crazy Ivan in flight school for nothing. Gloved fingers moved instantly. The dual wing of the throttle control dropped, then split, her other hand forcing the rig down and left, flinging it 180 degrees in less than a second. It had to be precise. The window for error was small. Too fast, too high, and she risked colliding with the Landval. Too slow, too low, and he'd be on her in less than a second, carbines flaring to take another shot, one that might not miss. The GMO pilot responded immediately as she dropped, shooting upward into a classic Immelmann. But it was too little, too late. A flick of the wrist, a scissoring pump of the throttle, and she was on his tail instead, following close, resident AI already lining up electronic crosshairs over the brilliant blue flames of the fighter's antique thrusters. The sign drive's nose-mounted dual-chambered auto-fire rail lance came alive instantly, primed and ready to fling its payload of supersonic rounds the instant her finger brushed against the trigger. She bit her tongue in concentration, kept with every shake the landfall threw at her. Her weapon systems were much more accurate than the GMO's. It wouldn't take more than one shot, one squeeze worth of rounds to carve up the Syndicate fighter, to light him up and send him spiraling down into the bogs below. But before she could pull the trigger, the landfall exploded. Yee-haw! Static lanced through the radio as something shot overhead with a buffeting shockwave and went blazing past the landfall's debris cloud into the swarm of Syndicate fighters. It was long and fast, narrow hull painted an eye-rending shade of brilliant crimson that shone bright and glaring as the rig went blitzing along through the sky with a tail of violent flame rocketing out behind it. For a split second she saw the thing in perfect detail, saw sunlight flash golden across the half-nude blonde, painted across the thing's smooth, angular nose, flaring along the wild lines of cursive that sprawled like supple pink rope and encircled the retro pinup with the words, "I flew with Captain Mac," and then it was gone, sweeping upward into an elegant arc and dropping from the sun to engage the unsuspecting mass of GMO rigs. "Good thing we were in the area, eh, boys?" The radio crackled again, alive with a man's grinning voice drawling into the mic in an excited Texan accent. "Move over, sweethearts. It's time for Captain Mac's boys to ride in like the U.S. Cavalry and kick some genetically modified ass." In a matter of seconds, the sky was full of support rigs, a full wing of K-8 slash drivers blasting in to follow Mac on full burn, amid the blaring notes of a bugle call that rang across the comm like something out of an old western. Hoots and hollers echoed the call, and Grand cut the throttle by half as the pack of Scarlet slash drivers burnt over and ahead of her, thrust vectoring panels of each rig's twin overhead helium-3 thrusters spewing flame, thundering into the heavens, ripping lines of fire through the sky. Inside the narrow, bubble-shaped cockpit of his slash driver, Captain Mac was already jamming the caps off a line of rockets and darting through the middle of the fray, with all the nerve of Colonel Custer leading a charge into the heart of oblivion. Gold-stitched cowboy boots flexed eager against rudder pedals, thick-necked golden spurs clinking quietly with the movement as he slipped away from a cascade of arc-wave fire and rolled, slick as synth lube, underslung frag cannon coming alive and bucking violently after the GMOs that broke away, trying to lead him, trying to escape. Inky flak filled the air in roiling clouds of deadly shrapnel as the cannon chased them, ripping through the swarm of modified crop dusters and recommissioned fighters like grenades through a fruit stand. In an instant, the call to retreat went out, and the rest of the GMO fighters scattered, but the move didn't come fast enough. With another series of shouts, Mac's men were on them, the few remaining sign drives of Grand's fighter wing, dropping clear of the fire as the slash drivers pounded the air so hard with shrapnel that only a single Syndicate fighter managed to peel away in time to save itself. Mac spotted it instantly as it came darting out of a cloud of oily smoke, a nimble little Ellison Conway V-11 Viafort. But before the pilot could hit his throttle and leave the fray behind, Mac set the line of rockets free, sending them screaming after the lone GMO. It took 2 seconds for the rockets to cross the distance, and in another instant the Viafor was gone, a cloud of fire that blossomed in the sky and left little to fragment or fall back to the mires below. Mac grinned. Someone sent a static-eaten cheer echoing through the comm. They were victorious, and the battle had been quick, fluid. Mac's men working with all the cohesive grace of a machine to make quick work of the Syndicate fighters before they could take down any more of Grand's sign drives. He'd always thought the Alpha semi-atmospherics had been a waste of Navy funding, that fighters like his K-8 slash driver were the weapon of choice for the TCGND. But the higher-ups thought otherwise, and all Mac and his men could do was keep the new sign drives out of trouble whenever they ran into a swarm of syndicate fighters they couldn't handle. It was a vain hope, but if there was ever a shot at making the high brass see the Slash driver's superiority over anything sign drive could crank out, it was in saving as many of the new semi-atmospherics as he and his men could, and just hoping someone would point out that it had been men like Captain Mac, in rigs like the K-8, that had done it. "Thanks for the support, Mac." Grand's voice broke into the calm noise as she came up alongside the captain's Slash driver, looking at him from across the wing of her sign drive. The 4 wingmen that had survived the massacre trailed in her wake, giving her space as she got close enough to see him, and the rest of Mac's men fell in line again quickly too, running in a staggered chain that put each rig out of the flaming tail of their thrusters. "If you're going as far as New Edinburgh, can I buy you a beer?" "I appreciate the offer, ma'am, but the boys and I, we're just passing through these parts." Mac tipped his hat at her from the cockpit of his rig, gave her a grin wide enough to see. "We've got some more moes to hunt down in the southern hemisphere, roundabouts Bowen and the Maxwell Range, before we make our rendezvous with the Fu Heitschweitz for refueling and rearmament." "I'll take a rain check then," she grinned back. "The name's Lieutenant Commander Amalda Grand. Look me up sometime." "You bet your bonnet I will," he shot back, then gestured quickly. "You take care of yourself in that sign drive Alpha there, Amalda. Thing's a death trap." "Every first run has its kinks to work out," she laughed. "These things are the future. They'll pave the way for some really impressive rigs, you'll see." "Whatever you say, lady," came Mac's response. He waved quickly, then peeled away slowly, chain of Slash drivers falling with him, following closely. "You can have your newfangled rigs. I'll stay with the tried and true," he chuckled. "The K-8s have never let me down, but I've seen plenty of sign drives fall out of the sky. Can't all be pilot error." Grand clicked the mic again, but by the time Mac had finished it was too late, and she watched his retreating thrusters flaring off into the distance, already burning along in supercruise, brilliant points of wild light that quickly disappeared among the green and the haze that hung between lazy and listing clouds. A slow, steady smile spread across her lips as her thumb slipped slowly off the mic. Mac's love for the Slash driver was admirable, but she'd seen the way the wind was blowing, seen the change in the way things were being done. Insertion and retrieval by ship from mesospheric altitudes would soon be a thing of the past, and rigs designed by sign drive that could punch through the atmosphere to rendezvous with ships in orbit were already becoming the TCGND's preferred tool for aerospace combat applications. It was just a matter of time before the support rigs and cavalrymen like Captain Mac went the way of the ancient horseback cavalry of the American West, forgotten by all but a rare few who would carry the traditions and memories on into the centuries, no matter what technological advances came along in their wake. Just another old relic, she laughed to herself, and briefly wondered if someone might say the same about her someday. Some young pilot spared from the jaws of death by her old sign drive as she slipped silently off and into the sunset, thinking about the day when she was once young, the day she flew with Captain Mac.